Welcome back to What's New with Mead. Today we're on episode number 17. In this episode, we are going to talk about yeast nutrients and a big test I did with yeast nutrient and raisins and some various things. I really just want to dive into kind of what yeast nutrients are and my results. So, I'm glad you're here. I hope you will do all the things, subscribe to the podcast, all those things. If you're watching on video, which you can do that on the Man-Made Mead Extras channel on YouTube, you'll see a video version of this right now. Hello to you if you're watching to me. If you're just listening, welcome. Gotta crack something open. Speaking of things that we're opening, we are drinking two different things. And I've got myself a semi-drinking game I'm going to do with this. I think it'd be interesting on this podcast. So it's currently storming pretty bad here in Oklahoma, and not like hurricane bad, but thunderstorm bad. So there's lots of thunder and lightning and various things. It's pretty loud. So I've decided every time I hear a big thunder clap, I am going to take a drink. So I have myself an easy sipper. This is the Valkyrie's Choice Original Craft Mead. This is their traditional mead. There's one Thunderstrike. And this thing's an easy drinker, 6.9%. I've done a review of it on the channel. Ricky from Grow and Fell Meadery is doing great things over there, so go check them out. They do a lot of great stuff. This thing's great, though. Then in my other hand, I have one of my own meads. This is an apple cinnamon mead that is 3 years old. And this review will be out, or is out on my channel, Man-Made Mead Extras, for this mead. It's a fantastic apple cinnamon mead. It's one that inspired me to continue to make apple cinnamon meads and try to master it. So that's what I'm drinking. And yeah, I'm definitely very excited. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, what are yeast nutrients? Well, yeast nutrient is food for your yeast. And lots of times it's a variety of different, it can be chemicals, but it can also just be various things. It's well, I'll put it this way. Yeast nutrient comes in two forms, in my opinion. You've got the kind of scientific made stuff like diammonium phosphate, which is more it's not fake, but it's definitely not as real in my opinion. Then you have the flip side. You have things that are mixed like diammonium phosphate and what's the other one? I'm blanking now. Crap, I can't remember. It's another phosphate. And stuff like autolyzed yeast. That is a little more real to me. Autolyzed yeast is literally boiled dead yeast. And I think that's important for us to know because we can use that to our advantage. Yeast nutrient does not have to be stuff you buy online, stuff you buy in the brew shop. It can be bread yeast that you boil, which kills it, and then you use to feed your other yeast, because yeast will actually eat each other in that regard. That's what autolyzed yeast is. Why is yeast nutrient important? I've already had a couple thunderclaps here. Why is yeast nutrient important? Well, every single mead has needs, as I am going to say. And if you're making whether it's a high gravity mead or possibly you're making a traditional mead, something that is low in nitrogen, you're going to find that the mead itself is going to struggle in some way. So what I am suggesting to you is that as you make your meads, you consider using yeast nutrient. And I'm going to say to use yeast nutrient because I have seen results. The test I am referring to is currently on YouTube, is on the Man-Made Mead channel. I ran a test to see if raisins are nutrients. Lots of people in the brewing community, in the mead community, have toted that raisins are a true and valid nutrient for your yeasts. And that's kind of on a scientific basis that the raisins have sugars within them. They also have other nutritional values to the yeast. There's certain things that those yeast can eat within the raisins, which is true. It's also true of apples, pears, anything else, any other fruit. There are things that the yeast can eat within that, not just the sugars. So I wanted to put that to the test. What I did, first of all, I ended up using or making 9 gallons of mead, essentially. I ran the test 3 times. The first time I did it, I ran it with the Lalvin K1 V1116 yeast. I made a 3-gallon batch of mead, and then I split that whole 3-gallon into 3-gallon glass carboys. I put a handful of raisins into one of them. I put a teaspoon of diammonium phosphate, or DAP, into the second one, and then the last one was a control, had nothing in it. So I let those ferment. The K1V1 in that case had some interesting results. I don't want to spoil everything. What I will tell you is that, I'll just say this: the raisins in that one specifically actually helped a little bit with the fermentation. I think they aided some to the yeast. So what I noticed was that the DAP version finished in like 12 days. I think that's right. And the raisins finished in 22, no, it was later than that, 24 or something like that. And then the nothing version finished fermenting in 28. And when I say finished fermenting, I mean went from 1.080 to 1.000. So in that case, the raisins did help some. Now, I ran the test 2 more times because I wanted to have proof of, either way, does this work, does this not work? So I ran it again, not specifically with the K1, but I switched over to the Lalvin D47. So I made another 3-gallon batch of must, split it into 3 parts, threw my yeast in, did the same thing, handful of raisins, teaspoon of DAP, nothing, and let that ferment. That one was a much tighter race because the raisin and the nothing kind of held each other at the same pace pretty well. And I did not notice a huge leap in the progress of the raisins version compared to the nothing. There was a slight lead, but it wasn't very big. The DAP one there finished again in like 8 or 9 days. It was a fast fermentation. I should also mention, I took gravity readings every 2 days in this test. So that's how I was monitoring all of my results to see where they were at. And that was quite the pain. So that one occurred, and then I did it one more time with the Mangrove Jack's MO5 mead yeast. Same idea, 3-gallon mead, split 3 parts, raisins, DAP, nothing. And that one was even closer of a race. The DAP fermented, I think, in 8 days for that one. The raisin and the nothing version took 20 days, I believe. I don't have my stuff pulled up right here. Again, there's a video of this if you want to see all of it. Essentially, what I noticed is that at least 2 out of those 3 times, the raisins added a small amount of nutrition, but they didn't add a lot. And alongside my results, compiling my results, I also did a taste test. So that's within the video. I'm not going to go through that portion, but I will tell you that there was a vastly different taste between the 3 in each grouping because of the fermentation process. Yeast nutrient really can help a mead ferment. Now, I want to caution you with this. If you're listening to this going, I need to use yeast nutrient in every single thing I do, otherwise it's not going to be a good brew. That's not true. You have to consider this. Some yeast have low nutrient needs. Some have high nutrient needs. Just because your mead ferments quickly does not mean it's necessarily always good. Sometimes when you ferment too quickly, you can run into the problem that the yeast will put off, the aromas from honey, the tastes of the honey could dissipate a little bit because of a quick and vigorous fermentation. So I think that's important. Now, I just realized you could probably hear the rain hitting my, what do you call this thing? Water heater thing. So sorry if you hear some raindrops. So that is the results of my raisin test. Could I have done that test a million more times? Absolutely. I could have done it probably 50 more times. And I'm pretty confident that I would have had very similar results throughout the entire process. I don't believe that raisins are going to put enough nutritional value into a mead to really propel it to be successful. In fact, I think raisins are more useful for adding body, for adding mouthfeel, and possibly taste to a mead than they are for nutrition. So if you're putting raisins into your mead for those reasons, absolutely. I think that's great. But if you're putting raisins into your mead because you're calling it yeast nutrient, well, you might not have access to DAP, Fermento, Ferment-K, all those things. So in that case, you could, I guess theoretically, use raisins to help your brew along a little bit. However, I wouldn't go with that. You can pretty much find bread yeast, baker's yeast, anywhere in the world. And so go buy yourself some cheap baker's yeast, boil it, and then put it into your brew, and that will act more as a yeast nutrient to help them. That's not adding nitrogen, though, in that case. The reason we need to add yeast nutrient is because most honey in general is low in nitrogen. So if you're making a traditional mead, you probably want to add yeast nutrient because the brew needs nitrogen. When you add fruits and some other ingredients, you'll add nitrogen that way. There is nitrogen in like some fruits and some various things like that. So you don't really have to worry about it as much with peaches, pears, apples, whatever, papayas, all of those things. That's just, I think that's important to say. I don't want to shame anybody for using raisins, and I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're offended because you think that I'm putting down raisins as the worst thing in the world. They're not. They do hold some value, but they, in comparison to store-bought yeast nutrient, specifically DAP, I should say, they're not holding a candle up to it. And so I think that's important. If you have access to DAP, those things, buy it if you can. So that's it. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to add yeast nutrient, and I want to go ahead and tell you about the different ways you can do it. When you're going to add nutrient in, you can choose to put it all in the front of the mead. I've kind of done a little podcast about this. It's about feeding your brew, about nutrients. You can put it all in the front, meaning you put your total grand value of DAP, Fermento, Ferment-K, whatever you have in the day zero of it. And that works. I mean, you can ferment that way. I do it a lot, honestly, because I get to be kind of lazy. When I have 12, like I currently have 12 projects going on back here. And there's no way I'm going to remember to step feed 12 different projects all at once, because that would be insane. And I would lose my mind trying to keep track of that. So I just generally am throwing my stuff in the front. If you have the time, capability, and willingness to do it, try using a staggered nutrient schedule. This means that you take your compound of yeast nutrient, Energizer, whatever you have, and you add it over 4 periods. You're going to add some on day 0, some on day 2, some on day 4, and some on day 6. When you do this, what you'll find is that you are feeding your brew over time, which generally means that they are going to feed more effectively. I guess that's a better way to say it. Instead of being gorged on all the food that they can in the beginning and just coasting, they're able to more manageably feed. Here's the one thing to watch out for. When you are staggered nutrient schedule, I guess, you need to make sure that you are in a place where you've degassed the mead before you do it. Because the first 6 days of fermentation are really vigorous. Lightning, thunder. The first 6 days of that fermentation are very vigorous, and there's a lot of CO2 that's built up. that doesn't get degassed just that quickly. So if you take and you throw DAP, dimonium, whatever, Fermaid O, Fermaid K, yeast energizer into that brew, it's going to foam up. It's going to turn into a volcano. And if you're doing it in a carboy, it literally turns into a volcano. So you need to make sure that you degas gently before you do this so that the yeast will not foam up so much that the carbon dioxide won't flow and blow up on you like it does. That's really, really important for you. Keep that in mind. So, when we are adding in that staggered nutrient schedule, I honestly prefer to do it. More thunder. We got double thunder. I prefer to do it that way, but I just don't always have time. That was a big one. I don't know if you guys can hear this. This podcast could be real noisy because of all the rain and things. It could be ethereal. I don't know. If you think it's ethereal, let me know. Right now, it's ethereal to me. So when do we add yeast nutrient other than for a traditional mead? You don't really need to add yeast nutrient, in my opinion, when you're making a low ABV mead, like a 6% hydromel, 7% hydromel. You can add it to help it push along, but most of the time, the honey, well, unless you're making just a traditional hydromel, in which case you do need to do that. Most of the time, the yeast will clear through that 7% pretty easily. It's when you start getting up into the 10 plus range with most things that you really have to aid in the fermentation. And it's especially important in situations where you are fermenting like 14, 15, 16, 17, 18%, huge bodied meads that have lots of needs. And what I mean by that is you're dealing with a high gravity situation. Your yeast have the potential, even if they can go up to 18%, to be stressed. If you add and give them food, that will help them be less stressed, in which case you have a healthier fermentation, a cleaner fermentation. The yeast don't put off flavors, aka fusels, that can go away with time. You just don't have to worry about any weird esters being created within that mead. So super important to do it if you are using or making a high gravity mead. I'm going to be through this mead before long. So there's another time you really need to add yeast nutrient, and that is when you make a bochet. If you've never made a bochet before, it is a caramelized honey that you burn the honey essentially. I've made a bunch of them now. In fact, it's one of my favorite styles of mead because it is very unique. I've gotten some super interesting character profiles out of various honeys, from mesquites to orange blossoms to clover honeys to, I think I've bochetted of avocado blossom honey one time. Incredible. You are taking and changing the characters of those honeys. I can't give you I can't give you a general bochet character other than I get a lot of whiskey taste from it. And it's a pretty easy process. Essentially, pour your honey into a pan, into a pot, preferably something that's tall enough to hold foam, because the bochet process of the honey causes the honey to foam up quite a bit, which can be very dangerous for one, but two, can be messy because it can actually foam over the top of your pot. So you need a deep pot of some sort. You're taking and putting honey into a pot, pan, whatever you have, and heating it up for X amount of time. And when I say heating, you're literally boiling the honey. So you get it up to a boil and you hold it there for X amount of time. Most of the time I do it for an hour to hour 15 minutes. It goes from, let's say, a light amber color to decently dark brown. So, or if you go further than that, it can start to get into like the dark malt, maybe black, maybe just a vastly different color from your start. When you're doing that, you are literally caramelizing certain sugars making them non-fermentable for yeast in general. So most bocets end up being a little sweet, ending up with some residual sweetness from sugars that the yeast could not ferment on. And that's one way to, quote, back sweeten a mead, is to just bochet the honey. And so you were stopping the yeast from being able to ferment on all that honey. In that case, because you're dealing with a traditional-esque mead that's a bochet, and you are already burning some of the nutritional source for the yeast, you have to provide them with yeast nutrient. Yeast nutrient in that case is what is going to help propel the yeast forward. Some yeast don't need a lot of yeast nutrient, but it doesn't hurt to put in there. You can, of course, put too much yeast nutrient in. You can put it in at the wrong time as well, and I'll get to that here in a moment. But at the beginning of a bochet, yeast nutrient, super, super nice to use. Now, I do want to get over to the side, like I just said, you can put yeast nutrient in the wrong time. There's this thing called the TOSNA protocol. Now, the TOSNA protocol is I'm looking right now on my computer, this is a calculator specifically. You can go through and you can put in a bunch of various things. This has this has gallons of mead, ferment O, do you prefer ferment O, ferment K, how big is your batch? So let's say I do 1 gallon. My yeast, I'm going to use the Lalvin D47, why not? My starting gravity is going to be 1.070, and I want to do, let's say, 3 grams of yeast for every gallon of mead. So this here has a breakdown. It says, well, let me back up. The TOSNA protocol is how much water, how much go-firm or yeast nutrient you need to add to your brew to be, effective, essentially. And so this right here says go-firm needed in this case 3.8 grams. Water to dilute go-firm 76 milliliters. So that's down to the milliliter of how much water you need to actually dilute the go-firm, which is interesting. Yeast needed 3 grams, like I said. Total nutrient needed 2.6 grams. And so that is assuming we're using ferment O, which is organic yeast nutrient. That's the one that has the autolyzed yeast, which is dead yeast, essentially. There's some other data on here that's super interesting and important. There's a 1/3 sugar break. This means when you're creating your mead, it will start fermenting. In this case, we started at 1.070. I need to know when my 1/3 sugar break is, because generally it is good to not add any more yeast nutrient after the 1/3 sugar break. I am going to kind of equate it to a runner of some sort, like let's say a sprinter, because long distance is different. A sprinter. They're going to fuel before the race. They're going to maybe fuel right at the beginning of the race, all those things. But the moment they start sprinting, you're not going to go try to hand that dude a granola bar and say, all right, keep going. Because they're already gone. They're already sprinting. They're on their mission. Same thing for the yeast. They're on their mission. If you've provided them with enough yeast nutrient by that point, they will be effective. So don't try and add any more sugar or any more yeast nutrient after that 1/3 sugar break. I think that's, again, super, super, super important for us. This also has a commercial scale dosage. I'm not really going to get into that. This calculator is really important. The TOSNA protocol is something that can help you ferment more efficiently, effectively. If you're questioning how much yeast nutrient should I put into my brew, well, hop on one of these calculators, fill in some information, and you'll find out pretty quickly just how much you need. And that's super, super important. So we've talked a lot about adding yeast nutrient, the importance of it, and I think I've touted how critical it is to add it. Let's talk about the flip side if you don't add yeast nutrient. So I've already explained some. Traditional meads generally need nitrogen, which is found in yeast nutrient, all those things. Does this mean that your mead cannot ferment without yeast nutrient? No, that's not true. Your mead can ferment on honey, water, yeast alone. The problem is the yeast might not be as effective or as quick as you want. If you add yeast nutrient, you can help make your brew make your brew go faster, which can actually quicken the process for making mead. So some people are of the mindset that you don't need to touch your mead until 6, 8, 12 months after you make it. Like, don't even take a sip of it because it won't be good until then. And I think that's crazy, just by the way. I think that you need to be actively trying your mead all the time. I mean, not all the time, but you need to get some little dropper or something to where you can take a sip of it from the carboy and see where it's at. See if you want to add more things, less things, whatever you want to do. So some people are of that mindset, don't touch it for 12 months. Some people are of the mindset, I want my mead to be ready in 2 months. And they'll make big bombs that are 16, 18%, and then drink them after 2 months, which, again, is not necessarily a bad thing. You're making your home brew. You're making your thing that you like. So if you like that, by all means, go for it. I don't want to shame anybody for drinking stuff like that. What I will say is that if you want to quicken your brew, if you want to make your brew quicker, you need to try and add yeast nutrient. That yeast nutrient will actually make it move faster, therefore quicken the process for you. Now, I do want to say within all of this, I, for a long time, never used yeast nutrient. And I can say 3 years later, this specific apple cinnamon mead that I'm drinking, I didn't have a single drop of yeast nutrient in it, other than possibly, of course, the apples and things I put in. So that could have helped in that regard. But I did not put DAP, I didn't put any Fermate O, Fermate K, anything like that. And this thing turned out great. It's also 3 years old. 3 years of sitting would hopefully be able to fix most, if not all, problems you're going to experience with your mead making, whether that be a bad flavor that develops, a bad alcohol that develops, a fusel, anything like that that is not necessarily up to your par, to your liking, will hopefully go away by the 3-year mark. But I want to be able to drink things faster. So what I've learned, what I've started to do, I'm now 100 and I think I just logged on brew number 119 on my log. I've found that while this stuff's incredible, 3 years stuff is incredible, this stuff doesn't last very often. I want to make stuff that I can drink in 3 months, 4 months. And I've also come to the point where I'm realizing this sounds silly, I'm a home brewer. Meaning that I am not selling this stuff. So I'm not trying to hold on to this bottle. I mean, I'm holding on to some stuff that's like, I have a whole box of things I'm holding on to. I'm not trying to hold on to this stuff so I can sell it for $50 in 3 years from now. That's not my goal. I want to make good things, but I want to be able to drink them quickly. Everyone has their thing. If you make a ton of mead, like I make a lot of stuff, put a couple bottles back. Do what I do. Put them in a box, stick them underneath your bed, stick them in a closet, do something where you literally are not thinking about it for X amount of time. And then in 2 years' time, 1 year time, whatever you want to do, pop it out, drink it, see how you feel. From there, of course, try to make it again if you want to do that. And I think you'll be pleased with that. So I've missed a couple thunder claps. And all of my talking. Oh man, this is so good. This Valkyrie's so light too. Oh man, that's another big one. I don't know if you guys can hear those, but they're definitely bumping. So we are back to what I was saying. We are home brewers. Most of us. If you're listening to this, you're probably a home brewer. If you're a commercial mead maker, then welcome. I can't believe you're listening to this silly podcast. This is my channel is all about home brewing stuff. I'm not doing commercial things. I would love to switch and do commercial things in the future. And when I do that, I am going to be thinking probably again about quick short-term meads like this Valkyrie choice. I bet they can churn this thing out in 2 months and it'd be good. I'm also going to think about the long term barrel aged 3-year mead and try and make those things. But I'm not there, so that's also important for us. Missed some lightning. So that's my nutrient talk. I've got a lot. I've done that test. Again, if you want to go see that test, go check out the Man-Made Mead channel. So I did this our raisins nutrient test, and I think it turned out really good. I was very, very pleased with it. So go check it out. Now, my last thing that I always do with every single podcast is I like to talk about some mead mistakes that I've made. And I think it's important to always discuss these because hopefully you're learning from my mistakes and I can learn from yours. In fact, I do a thing on my YouTube channel. It's like Community Mead Mistakes. That's all about various things that we've done that are kind of goofs. My most recent one this time was I have this conical fermenter that is from Craft Brew, and I really like it a lot. It has this mason jar attachment to the bottom, and you can close off the butterfly valve, and you can pull off the mason jar, and empty it out, put it back on, do all those things. Well, last time I did this, apparently I tightened it way too tight, because what happened was I ended up basically over tightening and having to siphon out of the conical fermenter rather than use its built-in function of essentially auto siphoning itself. I had to auto siphon out of it by itself, which was silly and just kind of annoying. So that was kind of one of my big mistakes I made recently. That's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. In fact, I think that's completely fine. But I am very thankful to get to do these things, and I hope that you will go check out the Man-Made Mead channel, because we are continuing to grow. And my push for you guys is, and I always say this every time, but I mean it, you guys are the lifeblood of the mead making career. Channels like myself, like Doing the Most, us homebrewer people who love to make mead and make content geared for homebrewers can only do so much. You guys have to take your experiences, your desire, your passion for this, and grow with it, and tell other people about mead making. And when you do that, I think we'll all find that mead making will grow quite a bit. So, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching. Check out the Man-Made Mead Extras channel. Check out the Man-Made Mead channel. And I hope to see you in a future video or whatever. There's a bunch of links down below if you want to check those out. I'll see you next time. Cheers.